The blood trickled down Katherine Hayes' face, each droplet a burning reminder of the brutality she'd endured only hours before. She stumbled through the moonlit Colorado wilderness, her torn dress catching on sagebrush as consciousness threatened to slip away with each labored step. The year was 1876, and in this unforgiving frontier, a woman alone faced dangers beyond imagination. Katherine had been traveling west on the stagecoach when the attack happened. The robbery was swift, violent, and left her for dead on the dusty trail outside Denver. Her traveling companions hadn't survived. Through sheer determination, she'd pulled herself into the sparse woods, hoping to escape notice from the bandits should they return to confirm their grim work. "Just a little farther," she whispered to herself, her vision blurring. The beating had been vicious, ribs cracked, face swollen, and a deep gash across her shoulder still leaking crimson down her arm. The memory of their laughter as they'd struck her made bile rise in her throat. A pinprick of light flickered through the trees ahead. Hope and desperation mingled as Katherine forced her legs to keep moving. It might be more danger, but without help, she wouldn't survive the night. The small cabin materialized before her like a mirage, smoke curling from its chimney into the star-studded sky. Katherine's knees finally buckled as she reached the wooden steps. Her bloodied hand rose weakly to knock, but instead she collapsed against the door with a dull thud. Inside, Thomas Hayes looked up sharply from his book. Living alone for 3 years had honed his senses to unusual sounds. He crossed the cabin in 3 long strides, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle propped beside the door. "Who's there?" he called, voice low and steady. No answer came. Only the night wind whistled a reply. Thomas eased the door open cautiously, rifle at the ready, when a mass of torn fabric and blood fell inward. It took him a moment to register that it was a woman. "Good Lord," he muttered, setting his rifle aside and kneeling to examine the unconscious form. Her face was barely recognizable beneath the blood and swelling, but she was alive barely. Thomas gently lifted her, surprised by how little she weighed, and carried her to his bed. Years as a ranch hand and then a solitary homesteader had taught him basic medical skills. After lighting more lamps, he assessed her injuries with clinical detachment. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, placing a cool cloth on her forehead. Katherine's eyes fluttered open momentarily, unfocused and filled with terror. She tried to scramble away but lacked the strength. "Please," she whispered. "No more." "I'm not going to hurt you," Thomas said, keeping his voice gentle. "You're safe now. I'm going to help you." Her eyes closed again as consciousness slipped away, but some of the tension eased from her battered body. Thomas worked methodically, cleaning her wounds with whiskey and water. The gash on her shoulder was deep, too deep to heal without stitches. He threaded a needle with steady hands and prepared to do what was necessary. "This will hurt," he told her unconscious form. "I'm sorry for that." An hour later, Thomas sat back, wiping sweat from his brow. He'd cleaned her cuts, stitched the worst of them, and bound her ribs as best he could. Now came the waiting. Dawn broke over the mountains, casting golden light through the cabin windows. Thomas had dozed in the wooden chair beside the bed, jerking awake at the sound of a soft moan. Katherine opened her eyes slowly, disoriented and in pain. The unfamiliar ceiling above her sent panic racing through her veins until a calm voice broke through her fear. "You're safe, miss. You're in my cabin about 10 miles outside Denver." She turned her head slightly, wincing at the movement, and saw a man watching her with concerned eyes. He was perhaps 30, with sun-browned skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was clean-shaven, unusual for these parts, with features that spoke of both strength and kindness. "Who Her voice cracked, throat painfully dry. "Thomas Hayes," he replied, offering her water. "I found you collapsed at my doorstep last night." He helped her drink, supporting her head with a gentle hand. "Katherine," she managed after swallowing. "Katherine Holloway." "Miss Holloway, you've been badly hurt. Do you remember what happened?" The memories flooded back: the stagecoach, the masked men, the violence. She closed her eyes against the onslaught. "Bandits," she whispered. "They attacked our coach. The others," she stopped, remembering the gunshots. "Don't strain yourself," Thomas said. "Sheriff Daniels makes his rounds out this way every few days. We can tell him then." Katherine tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, gasping as pain shot through her ribs. "Easy now," Thomas cautioned. "3 ribs cracked by my count, and I put 15 stitches in your shoulder. You need rest." "I can't impose," she protested weakly. "I need to get to Denver." "My aunt, Denver will still be there when you're healed," he interrupted firmly. "You try riding now, and those stitches will tear open faster than a calf at branding time." Despite her situation, Katherine found herself studying him. His cabin was simple but immaculately kept. A bookshelf lined one wall, unexpected in a frontier home. Everything spoke of a man accustomed to solitude but not slovenly in it. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, suspicion edging into her voice. A woman alone had to be cautious, especially with strange men. Thomas's expression remained open. "Would you rather I'd left you bleeding on my doorstep?" "No, but Miss Holloway, out here we help folks in trouble. It's how we all survive." He stood and moved to the stove. "I've got stew warming. You should try to eat something." As he turned away, Katherine caught sight of a scar running down the side of his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. This man had seen violence himself. The next few days established a careful routine. Katherine slept much of the time, her body demanding rest to heal. When awake, Thomas brought her broth and eventually more substantial food. He changed her bandages with clinical efficiency, his touch impersonal yet gentle. On the 4th morning, Katherine woke feeling stronger. Thomas had just returned from tending his horses and found her sitting up in bed. "That's an improvement," he commented, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "I feel less like death today," she replied with a small attempt at humor. "Good. Sheriff's due tomorrow or the next day. You up to telling him what happened?" Katherine nodded, though anxiety fluttered in her chest. "Yes, I should thank you properly, Mr. Hayes. You saved my life." Thomas looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just did what anyone would." "We both know that's not true." A silence fell between them, not entirely uncomfortable. "May I ask what brings you to Colorado territory?" Thomas finally asked, busying himself with coffee at the stove, Katherine's hands twisted in the blanket. "My husband died last winter. Influenza." The lie came easily after months of practice. "I'm going to live with my aunt in Denver. She owns a dress shop there." Thomas nodded, accepting her story without question. "Denver's growing fast. Good place for a new start. And you," she countered. "Most men don't live alone out here without reason." His expression closed slightly. "Most men have their reasons." The conversation ended there, but Katherine's curiosity remained. As did her wariness, she had learned the hard way that men's kindness often came with expectations. That evening, while Thomas chopped wood outside, Katherine managed to stand and shuffle to the window. She watched him work, the rhythmic swing of the axe mesmerizing. His movements were efficient, practiced. What had brought a clearly educated man to this solitary existence? More importantly, what would he want from her once she was healed? Thomas caught her watching and paused, giving a brief nod before returning to his task. No smile, no frown, just acknowledgement. It was oddly comforting. Sheriff Daniels arrived the following afternoon, his horse kicking up dust as he approached the cabin. Thomas had warned Katherine of his coming, giving her time to prepare herself mentally for recounting the attack. The sheriff was an older man with a silver mustache and sharp eyes that missed little. He removed his hat respectfully as Thomas introduced them. "Madam, mighty sorry about what happened to you," he said, settling into the chair Thomas offered. "Think you could tell me about it?" Katherine took a deep breath and began her account, describing the stagecoach journey, the sudden ambush, the violence that followed. She kept her voice steady even as her hands trembled in her lap. 3 men, she finished, all wearing bandanas over their faces. One had a scar here, she indicated her right eyebrow. They took everything of value. The driver tried to fight. They shot him, and Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, who were traveling with me. She swallowed hard. They thought I was dead too, I think. Sheriff Daniels had been taking notes. Sounds like the Lawson gang, been hitting coaches along that route for months now. He looked grim. We'll catch up to them eventually, but territory's big and men are few. What about her safety? Thomas asked from where he leaned against the wall. If they realize she survived, not likely they'd track her here, Daniels said. But might not be safe in Denver either, least until we catch them. She's the only witness. Katherine felt cold dread settle in her stomach. I have nowhere else to go. Thomas straightened. She can stay here until it's safe. Both Katherine and the sheriff looked at him in surprise. Mr. Hayes, I appreciate your help, but I couldn't possibly. It's the safest option, Thomas interrupted. My place is remote enough. No one would think to look here. Sheriff Daniels tugged thoughtfully at his mustache. He's right about that. And I'd feel better knowing you're somewhere secure, Miss Holloway. These men don't leave witnesses. But Katherine looked between them, frustrated at having decisions made for her. What about my aunt? She'll be worried when I don't arrive. I'll send word to her, Daniels promised. Discreetly. Where does she live in Denver? Katherine hesitated. Another lie. Larimer Street. Holloway Dress Shop. If her fabrication troubled Thomas, he didn't show it. I'll let her know you're safe but delayed, Daniels said, rising. And I'll spread the word to watch for those bandits. He turned to Thomas. You sure about this, Hayes? Taking responsibility for a stranger isn't small thing. Thomas's expression remained impassive. I gave my word to help her. That includes keeping her safe. After the sheriff departed, an awkward silence fell over the cabin. Katherine sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap. You don't have to do this, she finally said. I'm sure I could find somewhere in town. With respect, Miss Holloway, you heard the sheriff. Those men would find you in town. But imposing on you, it's no imposition. Thomas's voice softened slightly. This cabin has space enough. You need time to heal properly anyway, and he hesitated. I gave my word to protect you when I found you bleeding at my door. I don't break my promises. Katherine studied him, trying to discern his motivations. Finding no ulterior motive she could identify, she simply nodded. Then I thank you, Mr. Hayes. Thomas, he corrected quietly. If we're to share quarters for a while, might as well use my given name. Katherine, she offered in return. That evening, Thomas made up a bed for himself near the fireplace, insisting Katherine continue to use the single bedroom. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the occasional creak of floorboards as he moved about, Katherine reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. She had fled Philadelphia with nothing but the clothes on her back and the small inheritance her parents had left her, determined to escape the nightmare her life had become. Now here she was, dependent on a stranger's kindness once again. The irony wasn't lost on her. Yet something told her Thomas Hayes was different from the men she'd known before. His helping her seemed born of simple human decency rather than calculation. It was both comforting and unsettling to be so completely at someone else's mercy again. The days began to establish a pattern. Catherine's strength returned gradually. Thomas helped her outside to sit in the sunshine, supporting her carefully when her legs trembled with weakness. He tended his small herd of cattle and horses, repaired fencing, and hunted for fresh meat, all while ensuring she had what she needed. Their conversations remained cautious, circling around safe topics. Katherine learned he'd been a ranch foreman before buying this land 3 years ago. He discovered she could read and write well, having been educated at a ladies' seminary in the East. Neither pressed for deeper truths, respecting the privacy each clearly valued. A week after Sheriff Daniel's visit, Katherine was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the autumn chill, when Thomas approached leading a dappled gray mare. "Think you're strong enough to try sitting a horse?" he asked. "Might do you good to move around a bit more." Katherine felt a flutter of excitement. The confines of the cabin, pleasant as it was, had begun to feel restrictive. "I'd like that very much." "This is Willow," he said, patting the mare's neck. "Gentlest horse I've got." He helped Katherine mount, his hands strong and steady at her waist, careful of her still healing ribs. Once she was settled, he handed her the reins. "We'll just walk the property line," he said, mounting his own chestnut gelding. "Go slow and tell me if you need to stop." The ride was short but exhilarating for Katherine. The land around Thomas's homestead was beautiful rolling hills covered with golden autumn grass, a creek winding through a stand of cottonwoods, mountains rising majestically in the distance. For the first time since the attack, she felt something close to peace. "Your land is lovely," she commented as they rested the horses by the creek. Thomas surveyed it with quiet pride. "It's good land. Fertile valley, water year-round, protected from the worst winter storms by that ridge." He pointed north. "Took me 10 years working for others to save enough to buy it. It was worth the wait," Katherine said sincerely. "You've built something real here." Something in her tone made him look at her closely. "You sound like someone who understands the value of having your own place." Katherine dropped her gaze. "I've learned to appreciate security when I find it." Thomas didn't press further, but his expression suggested he heard what she wasn't saying. As they rode back toward the cabin, Katherine noticed Thomas scanning the horizon, his posture alert. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked. "No," he replied. "Just habit. This country teaches you to stay watchful." But Katherine sensed more behind his vigilance. That night she woke to the sound of him pacing, his footsteps crossing back and forth before the fireplace. The next morning, dark circles beneath his eyes revealed his sleeplessness. 2 weeks into Katherine's stay, Thomas announced he needed to ride to the nearest trading post for supplies. "I'll be gone overnight," he told her over breakfast. "Will you be all right alone?" Katherine nodded, though the prospect made her nervous. "I'll be fine. I'm much stronger now." Thomas hesitated, then went to a trunk in the corner. He returned with a small revolver. "Do you know how to use this?" She took it carefully. "My father taught me years ago." "Good, keep it close." "I don't expect trouble, but this country teaches you to stay watchful," she finished with a small smile. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him. "Exactly." After Thomas left, Katherine found herself restless. Her shoulder had healed well enough that she no longer needed the bandage, though the fresh scar was still pink and tender. Her ribs ached, but allowed her to move more freely. She decided to make herself useful by baking bread. Finding flour and other necessities in Thomas's well-organized pantry, she set to work. The familiar process was comforting, reminding her of happier times in her parents' home before everything had changed. As she kneaded the dough, Katherine reflected on her reluctant host. Thomas Hayes was unlike any man she'd known, quiet but not sullen, strong but not domineering. He seemed to carry his own burdens, yet never complained. Most strikingly, in all their time together, he'd never once made her feel threatened or indebted. By evening, the cabin was filled with the aroma of fresh bread. Katherine had also prepared a stew from the venison Thomas had left. It felt good to be productive again, to offer something in return for his protection. She had just banked the fire for the night when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Thinking Thomas had returned early, she moved toward the door, then froze as she realized there were multiple riders. Heart pounding, Katherine quickly extinguished the lamps, plunging the cabin into darkness. She grabbed the revolver from beneath her pillow and positioned herself where she could see the door while remaining hidden. Voices drifted through the night air, rough and slurred with alcohol. 3 men, maybe 4, not Thomas, not friendly. "Hayes ain't here," one voice said. "No horse in the corral. Check the cabin anyway," another replied. "Might be something worth taking." Katherine's palms grew slick with sweat around the revolver. The bandits, or just opportunistic drifters. Either way, she was alone and vulnerable. Footsteps creaked on the porch. The door handle turned locked, thankfully. Then a sharp knock. "Hello in there, anyone home?" Katherine remained silent, hardly daring to breathe. "Place looks empty," a third voice said. "Let's move on before Hayes gets back. Man's got a reputation." "Scared of him, Porter?" The second voice mocked. "Ain't scared, just smart. Hayes was a sharpshooter in the war. Heard he killed 20 men in one battle." There was a pause, then the sound of retreating footsteps. "Fine. Probably nothing worth our trouble anyway." Katherine stayed frozen in position until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Only then did she allow herself to sink to the floor, trembling with relief and lingering fear. Thomas returned shortly after noon the next day, his pack horse laden with supplies. He knew something was wrong the moment he entered the cabin. Katherine sat at the table, the revolver placed before her, her face pale but composed. "What happened?" he asked sharply, setting down his packages. She recounted the nighttime visitors, watching his expression darken. "Did you recognize any voices? Could they have been the men who attacked you?" Katherine shook her head. "I don't think so. They mentioned your name, knew you weren't home." Thomas's jaw tightened. He moved to check that nothing had been disturbed outside. "They said something else," Katherine continued when he returned, "about you being a sharpshooter in the war." Thomas stilled, his back to her as he removed his coat. "People talk, especially out here where entertainment is scarce. Was it true?" He turned to face her, his expression carefully neutral. "I served with the Union Army, Missouri Volunteers, as a sharpshooter." "Yes." His tone made it clear the subject was closed, but Katherine persisted gently. "You don't seem like a man comfortable with killing." Thomas met her gaze steadily. "No decent man should be comfortable with it, but sometimes." He paused, choosing his words. "Sometimes you do what's necessary to protect what matters." The intensity in his eyes made Katherine's breath catch. She understood then that his promise to protect her wasn't made lightly. This quiet, solitary man possessed depths she had only begun to glimpse. That night, Thomas slept in the chair by the door, rifle across his knees. Katherine protested that it wasn't necessary, but he was unmoved. "Until we know who those men were and what they wanted, we take precautions," he said firmly. In the morning, Katherine woke to find him already outside, checking the property boundaries. When he returned, his expression was grim. "Found tracks. 4 riders circled the entire property." "Looking for something," Katherine said uneasily, "or someone." Thomas sat heavily at the table. "Sheriff Daniels stopped by the trading post while I was there. Said they found 2 bodies down by the South Platte, members of the Lawson gang. The men who attacked me, possibly." According to Daniels, looks like they had a falling out with their partners, both shot in the back. Katherine wrapped her arms around herself. So the others are still out there. Yes, and if they've connected you to those deaths somehow. But I had nothing to do with it. Doesn't matter. Men like that don't need reasons, just excuses. Thomas's expression softened slightly at her distress. Don't worry. This place is defensible, and I don't intend to let anything happen to you. For the next several days, Thomas maintained a vigilant watch. He moved his bed permanently near the door and took to carrying his rifle whenever he worked outside. Katherine noticed he always positioned himself where he could see the approach to the cabin. Despite the tension, or perhaps because of it, something between them shifted. Their conversations became less guarded, more personal. In the evenings, they sat before the fire, Thomas carving wood while Katherine mended clothing she'd found in his trunk. "You're handy with a needle," he observed one night. "My mother insisted on proper feminine accomplishments," Katherine replied with a small smile, "though I was always better at reading than embroidery." She nodded toward his bookshelf. "You have quite a collection for a frontier homestead." "Books travel well," Thomas said. "And winters are long out here." Katherine set aside her mending and crossed to examine the volumes more closely. Shakespeare, Dickens, histories of the American West, and several books on animal husbandry and farming. "An eclectic library," she commented. "You're a man of contradictions, Thomas Hayes." He looked up from his carving. "How so?" "A soldier who values solitude, a rancher who reads Shakespeare." She traced the spine of a volume of poetry. "A man who lives alone but keeps a copy of Tennyson's love poems." Something flickered in his eyes. "Those were my wife's." The revelation hung in the air between them. Katherine waited, sensing there was more to come. Thomas set down his carving knife. "Eleanor loved poetry, said it reminded her there was beauty in the world even when times were hard." "What happened to her?" Katherine asked softly. "Childbirth, 6 years ago." His voice remained steady, but his hands tightened on the piece of wood he held. "We'd been married 3 years. The baby, a boy, died with her." "I'm so sorry." Katherine returned to her seat, her heart aching for his loss. "After I couldn't stay in Kansas City. Too many memories." He resumed his carving, the knife biting into the wood with controlled precision. "Worked ranches across 3 territories before settling here." Katherine understood retreat, the need to outrun pain. "And you've been alone ever since." "By choice." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "What about you, Katherine? What are you running from?" The directness of his question startled her. "What makes you think I'm running?" "The same thing that tells me your aunt doesn't own a dress shop in Denver." Katherine felt her cheeks flush. She'd known her deception wouldn't stand up to scrutiny forever, but facing it now made her stomach clench with anxiety. "I'm sorry I lied," she said quietly. "Habit, I suppose. Trust doesn't come easily to me anymore." Thomas waited, patient but expectant. Katherine took a deep breath. "My husband isn't dead. At least, he wasn't when I left Philadelphia 4 months ago." Thomas's expression revealed nothing, but he set aside his carving to give her his full attention. "Victor Holloway," she continued, the name bitter on her tongue. "From one of Philadelphia's oldest families. My father was in banking, our circles overlapped. Victor was charming, attentive. I was 20 and flattered by his interest." She stared into the fire, lost in painful memories. "The cruelty started slowly, small criticisms that grew into rage. Isolation from my friends and family. Then the beatings." Thomas's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "My parents died last year. Influenza, that part was true. With them gone, there was no one left who cared what happened to me." Katherine's voice grew harder. "The last time he broke 2 ribs and my wrist. Locked me in our bedroom for 3 days without food." "How did you get away?" Thomas asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Our housekeeper helped me. She'd seen everything. slipped me money from the household accounts over months. When Victor left for a business trip, I took what I had and fled west. Katherine gave a humorless laugh. I chose Denver because it was far away and growing fast, a place to disappear. And then the stagecoach attack. Yes, ironic, isn't it? Escaping one violence only to encounter another. Thomas was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low with controlled anger. If your husband were standing here now, I'd kill him where he stood. The simple declaration, delivered without drama or posturing, sent a shiver through Katherine. She believed him completely. Then you understand why I had to lie, she said. Victor has connections, money, if he's looking for me. Has he reason to think you'd come to Colorado? Katherine shook her head. I told no one my plans, but Victor is persistent when he wants something, and he considers me his property. Thomas rose and added wood to the fire, his movements deliberate as he processed what she'd told him. You're safe here, he finally said, turning to face her. I meant what I said when I found you. I'll protect you. From the bandits, from your husband, from anyone who means you harm. The fierceness of his declaration brought unexpected tears to Katherine's eyes. Why? You owe me nothing. I'm not your responsibility. Thomas crossed to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. The touch, the first deliberate contact between them that wasn't related to her injuries, sent warmth through her. Because I've seen too much cruelty in this world to stand by and allow more when I can prevent it, he said simply. Because you deserve better than what life has handed you so far. He released her hands and stood. And because I gave my word. That night, Katherine lay awake long after Thomas had settled into his makeshift bed by the door. His words echoed in her mind. You deserve better. Such a simple statement, yet it contradicted everything Victor had spent years convincing her of, that she was worthless, deserving of punishment, lucky he tolerated her at all. Could Thomas be right? The possibility was both terrifying and exhilarating. Outside, an early winter storm began to howl around the cabin, the first serious snowfall of the season. Katherine pulled the blankets tighter, grateful for the solid walls around her and the steadfast presence of the man sleeping across the room. For the first time in years, she felt truly safe. Morning brought a transformed world, everything covered in pristine white, trees bowed under the weight of snow. Katherine stood at the window, mesmerized by the beauty. First big snow of the year, Thomas commented, stoking the fire to combat the chill. Earlier than usual. It's beautiful, she said softly, and dangerous. We're likely snowed in for at least a few days. Katherine turned from the window. I'm sorry if I'm an added burden. Thomas shook his head. You're not. Actually, having someone else here makes winter more bearable. He hesitated. Been a long time since I shared a meal with anyone, let alone a season. The simple admission touched Katherine deeply. This solitary man had created a fortress of isolation around himself, yet he'd let her in without hesitation when she needed help. The snow continued for 3 days, transforming the landscape into a winter wonderland. Confined to the cabin, they established new routines. Thomas taught Katherine to play chess with a set he'd carved years before. She discovered an old journal of Alina's recipes and prepared dishes that filled the cabin with delicious aromas. In the evenings, they read aloud to each other from Thomas's books, the sound of their voices mingling with the crackle of the fire and the howling wind outside. It was during one such evening that Katherine realized how much her feelings toward Thomas had changed. As he read from The Tempest, his deep voice giving life to Shakespeare's words, she found herself studying his face, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his mouth shaped each word with care. More than his physical presence, she admired his quiet strength, his unwavering principles, his respect for her space and choices. He was everything Victor was not and everything she'd stopped believing existed in men. The realization frightened her. She'd sworn never to make herself vulnerable to a man again. Yet here she was, her heart opening like a flower to the sun beyond her conscious control. Thomas must have sensed her distraction. He looked up from the book. "Am I boring you?" "No," she said quickly. "Just thinking." "About?" Katherine hesitated. "About how strange life is. A month ago I was nearly beaten to death. Now I'm sitting by a warm fire, listening to Shakespeare in the middle of a snowstorm." Thomas marked his place in the book and set it aside. "Life has a way of surprising us for good and ill." "Yes." She gathered her courage. "Thomas, I need to ask you something." He waited, attentive. "When this is all over, when the bandits are caught and it's safe for me to leave, what will you do?" His brow furrowed slightly. "What do you mean? Will you go back to your solitude?" "Your life before I interrupted it." Thomas considered her question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "A month ago I would have said yes without hesitation. Now," he looked at her directly, "now I'm less certain that's what I want." Catherine's heart quickened. "What do you want?" The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken feelings. "I want," Thomas began, then stopped as a sharp crack sounded outside, not the wind, but the distinct sound of breaking wood. In an instant, his expression changed. He moved swiftly to extinguish the lamps, plunging the room into darkness except for the fire's glow. "Someone's outside," he whispered, reaching for his rifle. Katherine felt cold fear replace the warmth of moments before. "The bandits, maybe, or someone just seeking shelter from the storm." He didn't sound convinced of the latter. "Stay low and away from the windows." Thomas moved silently to the window, keeping to the side as he peered out into the snowy darkness. Katherine could see his profile, tense and alert. "See anything?" she whispered after a moment. "Movement by the barn," he replied softly. "More than one person." A lantern flared to life outside, illuminating 3 men struggling through the deep snow toward the cabin. Thomas's grip tightened on his rifle. "Get to the bedroom," he ordered quietly. "Lock the door and take the revolver." "I won't leave you alone against 3 men," Katherine protested. "Katherine." His voice was firm. "Please, I can't focus on protecting you if you're in the line of fire." Reluctantly, she retreated to the bedroom, taking the revolver with her. Through the thin walls, she could hear everything that followed: heavy footsteps on the porch, a pounding on the door. "Hayes, open up. We know you're in there." Thomas's reply was calm but carried the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. "State your business." "Got caught in the storm." "Need shelter." "There's a line shack 2 miles east, has provisions and firewood." A different voice now, impatient. "Don't play games, Hayes, we know she's in there. The woman from the stagecoach." Catherine's blood ran cold. They'd found her. "Don't know what you're talking about," Thomas replied evenly. "Bullshit. Sheriff's been asking questions all over the territory. Word gets around. Now open this door before we break it down." "That would be unwise," Thomas said, his voice hardening. "I'm giving you one chance to leave peacefully." Laughter from outside. "1 man against 3. Those odds don't favor you, Hayes. I've faced worse." A moment of silence then. "You're the one they called Ghost in the war, ain't you? The sharpshooter who never missed." Thomas didn't reply. "Thought so. Listen, we don't want trouble. Just the woman. She can identify us, and that's a problem we need to solve. You hand her over, we leave you be. Simple transaction." "There's nothing simple about murder," Thomas replied coldly. "And you're not touching her. Last warning, leave now." The response was a gunshot that shattered the window. Glass sprayed across the room as Thomas dropped to a crouch, returning fire with deadly precision. A scream from outside confirmed his aim was true. Katherine pressed herself against the bedroom wall, heart pounding, as more shots rang out. She could hear men shouting, the splintering of wood, Thomas's measured breathing as he fired again and again. Then a crash as the door gave way, heavy footsteps. A grunt of pain, the sounds of a desperate struggle. Katherine couldn't stay hidden any longer. Gripping the revolver, she eased the bedroom door open. The scene before her was chaos. Thomas wrestled with a bearded man near the overturned table. Another figure lay motionless by the broken door, blood pooling beneath him. The third attacker was nowhere to be seen. As she watched in horror, the bearded man slammed Thomas against the wall, a knife flashing in his hand. Thomas caught his wrist, straining to keep the blade from his throat. Without conscious thought, Katherine raised the revolver and fired. The bearded man jerked, then staggered backward, clutching his shoulder. Thomas immediately broke free, landing a powerful blow that sent the man crumpling to the floor. In the sudden silence, their ragged breathing seemed impossibly loud. "Behind you!" Thomas shouted suddenly. Katherine spun to find the third attacker lunging from the shadows of the hallway. She tried to bring the revolver up, but he was too fast, knocking it from her hand and grabbing her by the throat. "Bitch!" he snarled, his face inches from hers. With a shock, Katherine recognized him, the man with the scarred eyebrow who'd beaten her during the stagecoach robbery. "Let her go." Thomas's voice cut through her terror. He stood with his rifle leveled at the man's head, his aim unwavering despite the blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "Drop it or I snap her neck," the man growled, tightening his grip until Katherine gasped for air. Thomas's expression was deadly calm. "You'll be dead before your hands can tighten." "Maybe, but she'll still die." "Then we both lose," Thomas replied, "but I guarantee you'll lose first." Something in his voice, the absolute certainty, the cold promise of death, made the attacker hesitate. In that moment of indecision, Katherine drove her elbow backward with all her strength, catching him in the stomach. His grip loosened just enough for her to twist away. Thomas fired. The bullet struck with pinpoint accuracy, and the man collapsed without a sound. For several heartbeats, neither Katherine nor Thomas moved. Then he was beside her, his free arm pulling her against him in a fierce embrace. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice rough with emotion. "No," she managed, though her throat burned where the man had gripped it. "You're bleeding." Thomas ignored this, releasing her only to check that both attackers inside the cabin were no longer threats. The bearded man still breathed, though unconscious from Thomas's blow. "We need to secure him before he wakes," Thomas said, already moving to find rope. "And check outside for anyone else." But a quick inspection confirmed that only 3 men had attacked, 2 now dead, 1 unconscious and bound tightly to a chair. The snowstorm had intensified, erasing their tracks almost as quickly as they'd been made. As the adrenaline faded, Katherine began to shake uncontrollably. Thomas guided her to sit near the fire, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders before setting about restoring order to the cabin, righting the table, covering the broken window with a board, dragging the dead attacker outside into the snow. When he finally returned to her side, his own hands were shaking slightly. Without a word, Katherine took the cloth he'd been using to wipe blood from his face and continued the task herself, her touch gentle on the cut above his eye. "These were the men who attacked you on the stagecoach?" he asked quietly. Katherine nodded. The one by the door was there, and him." She nodded toward their prisoner. "He was the leader, I think." Thomas's expression darkened as he looked at the unconscious man. "When the storm breaks, I'll take him to Sheriff Daniels. His testimony should clear your name." And then, Katherine couldn't keep the anxiety from her voice. Thomas turned back to her, his eyes softening. "And then you'll be free to continue to Denver, or he hesitated, or stay if you wished. The simple statement hung between them, filled with unspoken meaning. "Are you asking me to stay?" Katherine whispered. Thomas took her hands in his. "I'm asking for the chance to know you without fear standing between us. To see if what I feel, what I think we both feel, is something we want to build upon." "And what do you feel?" She needed to hear him say it. "That meeting you has awakened parts of me I thought were dead and buried with a leaner." His voice was low, intense. "That the idea of you leaving makes this cabin seem emptier than it ever was before." Katherine felt tears gather in her eyes. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not of you, never of you, but of trusting my heart again." "I understand fear," Thomas said, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. "After Alina died, I thought I'd never risk loving again. The pain was too great." "What changed?" "You." The single word held volumes of meaning. "You, stumbling to my door half dead yet fighting with every breath to survive. You, healing and revealing your strength day by day. You, trusting me with your story despite every reason not to trust anyone." Katherine leaned into his touch, closing her eyes briefly. "I've never met a man like you, Thomas Hayes." "Is that good or bad?" A hint of vulnerability showed through his usual composure. "Good," she whispered, looking up at him. "Very good." The moment stretched between them, tender and fragile. Then a groan from their prisoner broke the spell. Thomas straightened, instantly alert again. "He's waking up, stay back." The bearded man regained consciousness with a string of curses, struggling against his bonds until he realized the futility of it. His eyes widened when he saw Katherine. "You," he spat. "Should have finished you when we had the chance." Thomas stepped between them, his stance protective. "You've killed your last innocent, Lawson. Sheriff Daniels will see you hang for what you've done." The man, Lawson, sneered. "If I'm hanging anyway, what's the harm in telling you folks exactly what's coming for you? That woman's husband has posted a $1,000 reward for information on her whereabouts, dead or alive." Katherine felt the blood drain from her face. "Victor knows I'm in Colorado." "Don't know about that," Lawson replied with malicious satisfaction. "But his notice is in every post office and sheriff's office from St. Louis to San Francisco. Very detailed description. Mentioned a scar on your lower back, birthmark shaped like a leaf." Thomas glanced at Katherine, who nodded slightly in confirmation. It was true, and something only Victor would know. "Quite the coincidence, finding you during a simple stagecoach robbery," Lawson continued. "Figured we'd collect the reward after we cleaned out the other passengers. Then you went and survived." His gaze shifted to Thomas. "But it doesn't matter. If it ain't us, it'll be someone else. $1,000 buys a lot of persistence." Thomas's expression revealed nothing, but Katherine could sense his anger. "You've said your piece," he told Lawson coldly. "Now you can stay silent or I'll gag you. Your choice." Lawson glared but fell quiet. Throughout the long night, Thomas kept vigil over their prisoner while Katherine dozed fitfully by the fire. Dawn brought clearer skies and the realization that they needed to decide what to do next. "The snow's deep, but passable," Thomas reported after checking outside. "We can get to town today if we leave soon." Katherine nodded, her mind still reeling from Lawson's revelation. "And then," Thomas sat beside her, speaking low enough that their prisoner couldn't overhear, "then we need to consider your options. If your husband has put out a reward notice—" "I can't stay in Colorado," Katherine interrupted, her heart sinking. "Or anywhere he might think to look." "There's another possibility," Thomas said carefully. "We could go west, California, Oregon Territory, somewhere he has no connections. Start fresh." The word caught her by surprise. Thomas met her gaze steadily. "If you'd want that, I won't presume." "No," she interrupted again. "I mean, are you saying you'd leave your home, everything you've built here, A home is more than land and buildings, he replied simply. I've learned that lesson twice now. The implication that she had become home to him stole Catherine's breath. Thomas, I can't ask that of you. You didn't ask. I'm offering. He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. Katherine, I don't need long acquaintance to know what matters, and protecting you being with you matters more than this place. Tears blurred her vision. But your life here can be rebuilt elsewhere. His certainty was unwavering. The question is whether that's what you want. Me with you wherever safety lies. Katherine looked into his eyes and saw no hesitation, only sincerity and something deeper that made her heart race. Yes, she whispered. That's what I want. Their prisoner's mocking voice interrupted the moment. Touching. But you'll never outrun a man like Holloway. Men with that kind of money and spite don't give up. Thomas rose and crossed to Lawson, his expression cold. You don't know what kind of man I am or what I'm capable of protecting what's mine. Yours, Lawson laughed. She ain't property, mister. No, Thomas agreed, surprising both Lawson and Katherine with his calm response. She's not property. She's a woman who deserves freedom and peace, and I intend to ensure she has both. He turned back to Katherine. Pack what you can carry. We leave for town in an hour. The journey to town was arduous, the horses struggling through deep snow while Thomas led a third mount carrying their bound prisoner. Katherine rode beside him, wrapped in layers against the bitter cold, her mind churning with plans and fears. By mid-afternoon, they reached the outskirts of the small settlement that served as the area's trading center. Sheriff Daniels met them at the jailhouse, his expression grave as they related what had happened. Been tracking Lawson and his boys for months, he said, locking their prisoner in a cell. Never thought they'd be bold enough to attack a defended homestead. Desperation makes men stupid, Thomas replied, his hand resting protectively at Katherine's back. The sheriff nodded, then hesitated. About that reward notice the prisoner mentioned it's real. Came through official channels about a month ago. Katherine felt her heart sink. Then you know who I am. I know someone's looking mighty hard for a woman of your description, Daniels replied carefully. Whether you're that woman or not ain't my business unless you've broken the law. She hasn't, Thomas said firmly. Then that's all I need to know. The sheriff studied them both. But if I were you, I'd consider moving on. Territory's getting smaller every day with the railroads coming through. We've already decided to head west, Thomas told him. I'd appreciate it if you'd wait a day before telegraphing about Lawson's capture. Give us a head start, Daniels nodded slowly. Reckon that could be arranged. He turned to Katherine. Whatever your reasons for running, madam, I hope you find peace. Thank you, she said sincerely. They spent the night at the town's small hotel, Thomas insisting on separate rooms despite Katherine's lingering fears. Your reputation matters, he told her gently, and so does doing things properly. In the morning, they made final preparations. Thomas sold his land to a cattle baron who'd been making offers for years, receiving a fair price in gold and bank drafts that couldn't be easily traced. Katherine purchased new clothing and practical supplies for the journey ahead. As sunset approached, they stood on the hotel porch watching the town's quiet activity. Last chance to change your mind, Katherine said softly. Your whole life is here. Thomas turned to her, his expression tender yet resolute. My life is with you now if you'll have me. Katherine felt warmth bloom in her chest despite the winter chill. I spent years believing I'd never trust another man, that I'd never feel safe again. She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. You've proven me wrong on both counts. Thomas brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I promise to protect you always. I meant it then, and I mean it now not just physically, but in every way that matters. I know, she whispered. That evening, as they finalized their plans to depart at first light, a telegram arrived for Thomas. He read it with furrowed brow. "From a friend in Denver," he explained. "Victor Holloway arrived there 3 days ago. He's asking questions all over the city." Katherine felt ice in her veins. "He's here, in Colorado?" "Yes, but Denver's 100 miles from here and will be headed in the opposite direction." Thomas's voice was steady, reassuring. "By the time he thinks to look this way, we'll be long gone." They left before dawn, heading southwest toward the mountain passes that would eventually lead them to Nevada and California beyond. The journey would be challenging in winter, but Thomas knew the trails and had planned their route carefully. As the town disappeared behind them and the vast expanse of wilderness opened before them, Katherine felt a curious mixture of anxiety and exhilaration. Beside her, Thomas rode tall in the saddle, his presence a constant reassurance. "No regrets?" she asked as they paused atop a ridge, looking back at the valley below. Thomas considered the land he was leaving, the place he'd rebuilt his life after losing everything once before. Then he looked at the woman beside him, her eyes bright with hope despite all she'd endured. "No regrets," he answered truthfully. "Just gratitude for second chances." Katherine smiled, the first truly carefree expression he'd seen from her. "To California, then, to our future," Thomas corrected gently. "Wherever it leads." They rode west, two souls bound by circumstance and choice, leaving the past behind with each hoofbeat. The journey ahead would be long and not without danger, but Katherine no longer feared the unknown. With Thomas beside her, she had found something she'd stopped believing existed: not just safety, but the promise of joy. As the winter sun climbed higher in the clear Colorado sky, they disappeared into the vastness of the American frontier, riding toward a new beginning neither could have imagined just months before. 5 years later, a small farm nestled in the fertile valley of Northern California's Sacramento River Basin bore testimony to dreams realized. Rows of fruit trees stretched toward the mountains, their branches heavy with summer bounty. A sturdy farmhouse stood amid gardens bursting with vegetables and flowers, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. On the wide front porch, Katherine Hayes sat in a rocking chair, watching her husband work with their 3-year-old son, teaching him how to feed the chickens that pecked contentedly in the yard. Nearby, their infant daughter slept peacefully in her cradle, her tiny face the perfect blend of her parents' features. "Careful, Thomas Jr.," Katherine called as the little boy scattered grain with enthusiastic abandon. "The chickens only need a little." Her son giggled as the birds flocked around him. "They're hungry, Mama," Thomas straightened, ruffling the boy's dark hair affectionately. "Everything's hungry when you're the one with the food, son." The scene before her filled Katherine with profound contentment. Their journey west had been arduous but ultimately successful. Using his farming knowledge and her unexpected talent for business, they had built a prosperous life in California's growing agricultural community. No word of Victor Holloway had reached them in years. Whether he had given up his search or simply failed to trace them this far west, Katherine didn't know. What mattered was the life they'd created, one built on mutual respect, deep affection, and the unshakable trust that had grown between them. Thomas caught her watching and smiled, that rare, full smile that had become increasingly common as the years passed and the shadows of their past receded. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked, climbing the porch steps to stand before her. "How fortunate I am," she answered honestly. "How completely my life transformed the day I stumbled to your door." Thomas knelt beside her chair, taking her hand in his. "I think we saved each other, truth be told." Katherine nodded, remembering the solitary man she'd first met, haunted by loss, withdrawn from life. Perhaps we did. He leaned forward to kiss her gently, a casual gesture of affection that still made her heart flutter after all this time. No perhaps about it. Little Thomas ran up the steps, breathless with excitement. "Papa, can we ride to the creek now? You promised." "So I did," Thomas agreed, standing. "Want to come along, Katherine?" "I think I'll stay with Elizabeth," she replied, nodding toward their sleeping daughter. "But bring me back some of those blackberries if they're ripe." Thomas helped their son mount the gentle mare they kept for family rides, then swung up behind him. "We won't be long," he promised. As Katherine watched them ride toward the creek that bordered their property, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from terror to safety, from despair to hope, from isolation to family. The brutal beating that had nearly ended her life had instead become the beginning of a new one. Thomas Hayes had not only stitched her wounds and sworn protection, he had shown her what true partnership meant: supporting her dreams, respecting her independence, loving her without conditions or demands. Elizabeth stirred in her cradle, tiny fingers reaching upward. Katherine lifted her daughter into her arms, cradling her close as she rocked gently. "Your father is a remarkable man," she whispered to the infant. "He taught me that love doesn't have to hurt, that strength can be gentle, that safety can be found not in walls but in each other." As the California sun began its descent toward the coastal mountains, painting the valley in gold and amber, Katherine Hayes closed her eyes in gratitude. The woman who had once fled in fear now lived in peace, surrounded by love that had healed more than just her physical wounds. Thomas had kept his promised protection always, but he had given her so much more. Together, they had built something neither could have created alone, a home where safety was never in question, where love was demonstrated daily, where the future stretched before them bright with possibility. And in that peaceful certainty, Katherine found her greatest healing of all.